paralysis because of the great pandemonium which caused by the epidemic, COVID-19. And since then, it seems as if the whole world went into mourning for J.P. Clark. Now a year has passed and the country, the whole world seems to be waking up again. And so it's just appropriate that we come to look at the legacy that J.P. Clark left behind. And we've got quite a number of speakers here today who will be giving us various aspects of his work. So I welcome you all, and I want to, before we go on to the proper program, we want to invite some of the hosts of this gathering to give us some remarks, very brief remarks, before we move on to the major speaker. My name is Femi Oshofison, and I'll be joined later by Hope Egaga for this memorial. So if we are ready, I would like to call, first of all, on the head of the Department of English, the Department of English in the University of Ibadan, where J.P. Clark started his career. So please, Mrs. Jegede, can you please give us some remarks for about 5 minutes? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Go ahead, please. Can you please unmute her? Sorry, can you, she's still muted.
Professor Jegede, unmute yourself,
Yeah,
please.
I've unmuted myself.
Okay, please go ahead.
Once again, I want to say good afternoon to everyone that is present here today to celebrate an icon, a father by excellence. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Department of English, and I warmly welcome everyone to the University of Ibadan, Nigeria's premier institution of higher learning, and the great citadel of learning, where many world-renowned scholars drank from its profound fountain of knowledge. It equally gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's special event, which is the commemoration of the first J.P. Clark Memorial events. Today indeed marks a significant day in the history of African literature. And we are gathered here for one unilateral purpose, which is to celebrate our distinguished Nigerian and literary icon, whose landmark achievements have made both individual and collective impact on the lives of thousands, if not millions of people across the globe. Today, we have come to honor our father, our teacher, our friend, colleague, mentor, elder statesman, hero, and idol, the late Professor John Pepper Clark Bekede-Remo. We are here because we evidently know and clearly understand the important role that he played during his lifetime, as well as the lasting legacy that he left behind. So I'm making this speech as the head of the department, as I said earlier, because it is this department that birthed the rise of the literary icon. He obtained his first degree in this department with flying honors in 1960. And apart from this, during his time at the University of Ibadan, J.P. Clark became friends with many giants of literature, and he arguably honed his writing skills. He started editing various magazines such as The Horn and The Beacon. He became friends with the likes of Abiola Erele, Obiwale, Michael Echero, who today are regarded as giants in Nigerian and African literary and critical space. While at the University of Ibadan, J.P. Clark edited those magazines. He wrote poems and he also wrote plays. And one significant thing is that even while he was there, his plays were performed for different occasions. And specifically, I'd like to recall that his play titled Song of a Goat was performed for the Mbari Club in 1961. He was later to work as a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies in 1963. University of Ibadan, therefore, had an irrevocable influence on J.P. Clark's personality, as well as his literary oeuvre. It was in Ibadan that J.P. Clark met his wife-to-be, then Ebun Odutola, whose name I mentioned respectfully, and who later became Professor Ebun Clark. His renowned poem titled Ibadan presents the ancient city of Ibadan as the land of dust and gold. And there are so many things that J.P. Clark actually did in Ibadan. So one can say that is indeed the son of this department. And his name here will never be forgotten on the lips of both lecturers and students for many years to come. J.P. Clark, as is fondly called, is a playwright, is a poet, and is known in many capacities as a successful literary icon. Therefore, this gathering today is the right step in the right direction. And I especially thank the organizers of this epoch-making event. I also appreciate the family members, friends, mentees, and well-wishers who gather here today to celebrate our hero, whose love for his fatherland knows no bound. He's a man of vision, full of courage and utmost dedication to growth and development of his society. He is indeed a worthy role model par excellence, with lasting legacies for many generations to come. I therefore congratulate all of us with all the resounding success in today's deliberation. Though I would not go without mentioning that the department would have loved to be more involved in the arrangement and implementation of the program because of the important space that J.P. Clark occupies, not only in our department, but also in our lives. Thank you all for coming and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Jegede, for that. Now I'll be calling on the next speaker, who is Dr. To give us some remarks. Alicia. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Prof? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Felicia Akoboriole, representing Department of English, University of Lagos, University of First Choice, and the nation's pride. The icon we are celebrating this afternoon is one of the founding fathers of the English department, University of Lagos, And we even started celebrating him while alive. The celebration started when we organized a lecture and a conference in his honor, where we didn't know, he looked very healthy then, we didn't know that he was going to be away from us so soon. But when Professor Hope Egaga went to become a commissioner of higher education in Delta State, the conversation had continued about how we are going to honor this great man. And he used his government connection, brought the governor, and at the end of it all, a center was built and named after J.P. Clark. So we have a J.P. Clark Center that contains all his works. So any researcher that wants to write anything about any of the works of J.P. Clark should feel free to come to UNILAG, to the J.P. Clark Center, where you have a rich library of all his works, his essays, his interviews. They are all deposited there. So it's unfortunate that he's not with us physically, but he lives on in his works. We are very grateful for what he has put down, and some of his works we use as undergraduates, we are still using as postgraduate teachers, especially the Ozidi Saga. The epic is a notable epic that I never forget to recommend to my students of oral literature, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level. And we never forget characters like Temugedeke. So we thank you for the big names that we wish to see on this program, and for taking time off to come and be with us this afternoon. We really, really appreciate. Thank you very much. We wish all of us happy memorial celebration. Thank you.
Very much, Prof. We move on now to Dr. Majoro. Please, can you give us some remarks, opening remarks?
This is Architect Majoro. Hello.
Pardon? Yeah.
Architect Majoro, did you say?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Is that Majoro? Majoro, is that?
Yes.
Okay, please.
I'm Architect Charles Majoro. I'm the President General of the Government College Old Boys Association Worldwide, a school that J.P. Clark attended from 1948, a school which we are proud to say played a great role in forming the character of his person as a learning person that he became later on. This event, marking the first anniversary of the passing of Emeritus Professor J.P. Clark, is indeed a fitting celebration of his essence, his rich corpus, which has given an inimitable presence beyond the physical, and through which we still enjoy a commune with him and all his ideas. His plays, poetry, and other works have always held a special place for many of us, not only old boys, and I'm sure for what we are hearing of the academia, especially in the days he managed the Peck Repertory Theatre at Onicom. To watch him in his craft was such delight. I have some very personal, remarkable, indeed unforgettable personal interactions with him. One, when he was on the board of the Petroleum Trust Fund, and I was a professional coordinating consultant of all projects in Zone 6, which approximates today to the South-South, or what we call the Niger Delta. All the time, he left no more without any doubt about his firm and clear impressions about the people of that area and where he stood there. Another one was J.P. Clark's apparel. He never wore anything more than a shirt and a trouser, no matter the solemnity of that occasion. That was his dressing code. 3, I also miss very much his several invitations he gave to me to visit his island up with him off the coast of Kiagbodo, his native village, to see his creative hideout and enjoy some fresh fish, the salubrious outdoor air of the Jaw Creeks. Somehow, I was always unavailable to take that boat ride across to spend the weekend. What an opportunity I've lost. That is the bane of urban life in Lagos. Another thing I'd like to say, I'm happy that he personally took me to this library, which the HOD ULAG has talked about at Koga campus. I was very proud of that place, and he summoned me as a very junior old boy to come with him to come and look at that library, and it was a sight to behold. He always fondly called me Charles, and I dared not call him any other name other than Prof, if not I would be in trouble. That's the kind of relationship I had with that great man. Though he's gone from this ethereal reality, Emeritus Professor John Pepper Clark Beckerdermo is a treasure to us as old boys of that great school, Government College Ughelli, where we have been regaled of his legend as a student. One particular story, which I speak with trepidation of Jacob spoken with one of his juniors many years ago before I even entered Government College, because he went there in 1948. He was admitted there in 1948 as one of his juniors who was admitted a year after him recalls. JP was an enigma of sorts. As a first class, one student at DCU, this particular junior boy was astounded at this small fellow, because JP was not very big in stature at that time, who took delight in striding the hallways of his dormitory and speaking loudly to the book in his hands, like some lord, and occasionally reeling off verses and texts extempore in a role play of some character from literature. Intrigued, and very well intrigued, he asked who this smallest student was, and was told that that was J.P. Clark, a boy just in class 2 at that time. That was 1949. JP's mastery of the English language was legendary among his schoolmates, such that his tongue was feared more than fists by everybody else. And he wielded it as though he owned it, eliciting dread and consternation, especially when he wielded it with a fellow student, sometimes an even irascible senior. Yet, he was such a very pleasant senior, accommodating the failures of his junior and lesser mortals. As a member of Government College, really, he was a genial, was very genial, a man who was such a great company. He radiated conviviality whenever I attended our GCOBA event. GCOBA stands for Government College Old Boys Association, which were many because of his simplicity. Despite his towering stature in academia, he was an ancient mariner, a class created for old boys of a certain category of Government College Ughelli students. We called ourselves mariners. Not that Ughelli was on a shore, but we started in Warri on a riverside. So all Government College Ughelli old boys were called mariners. And to be an ancient mariner, you have to be an accomplished person. Professor J.P. Clark also attained the Lifetime Achievement Award, an elevation given to very few successful old boys of our grade school, Government College Ughelli. We miss JP, and this is why we cannot let his memory and legacy go to waste. It is indeed gratifying, and we're indeed proud that JP's family and the Department of English, University of Lagos, instituted this event in his honor. As old boys of Government College Ughelli, we hold Emeritus Professor J.P. Clark Beckerdermo very dear. In celebration of his scholarship and the honor he brought to our school, we have instituted a J.P. Clark Prize for literature for students in our old school to keep aloft his essence among our younger ones. On behalf of the National Executive Council and members of Government College Ughelli Old Boys Association, we thank you for this honor done to our distinguished and quintessential ancient mariner, J.P. Clark. God bless you, and may he continue to rest in peace in Jesus' name. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, especially about your school. I can see that. But some of us also came from very good schools. That's why we're able to emulate JP Clark.
Government college was different.
Yeah, thank you all for all these opening remarks. Now I will pass on the line to Professor Hope Egaga now to continue from this spot. Professor Hope, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Femi Oshofiso, for graciously piloting the first part of this program. I welcome you to Lagos and celebration in honor of our distinguished Professor John Pepe Bekedere-Mokla, who was head of the Department of English, University of Lagos from 1967 to 1974 and from 1976 to 1977. May I at this time invite Nobel laureates. Until last week, the only Black African who had won the Nobel to give his remarks.
News.
The nature of
Send this to who, please? This beach for now. This one. Who? To who, please? You can put my name. Hope, can you hear me? Hope, I think we should postpone this part for now. Hope, am I muted? Hope, let's postpone this part for now and come back later to it.
Hope is muted, so I can't hear you.
Hope, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm suggesting that we postpone this part for now and come back to it later so as to keep time.
Well, thank you very much. We apologize for the poor audio quality, but it's recorded and it will be played on YouTube. Thank you very much for your patience. We also thank the Nobel laureate for graciously agreeing to give the opening remarks. He's been quite friendly and supportive each time we called him to be with us whenever we celebrated our own dear JP. It is now time to invite the speakers. Perhaps I should do a little background. It is within the context of a poignant, profound, and perhaps a keen ritual imagination that we encounter John Pepper Clark in his literary world, as evidenced by the evocative power of his primal poetic compositions in the drama and poetry genres, especially so as some of the early works, such as Song of the Goat through Ozidi, the middle part, The Boat, The Return Home, and the later Remains of the Tide. His only known detailed work of prose, the semi-autobiographical America the America, at once immediate in contents and prophetic in thematic concern, exists outside this ontology of ritual and the mythic imagination, for good reasons, I dare say. In both language and thematic concerns, therefore, J.P. Clark etched his name in the annals of time and human memory. literally writing continuously, never dropping the pen till he swam into the other world from the banks of River Kiagbodo. Now, after that background, we are now going to invite our speakers. I will do a general introduction of all the speakers, and when it's time for them to speak, we'll simply identify them. The first in line is Dr. Nduka Otiono, who is an associate professor of African Studies, Carleton University in Ottawa. He'll be speaking on discussing J.P. Clark and poetic expeditions in mortality. The next speaker is Professor Mabel Ewerioma, Professor of Theatre Arts, University of Abuja, who will be discussing J.P. Clark, Towards an Agenda for Democracy. The third speaker is Professor Saint Bilika, the man I call the only living saint of the Department of Theatre Arts, University of Abuja. He will be discussing an eco-critical discourse of J.P. Clark's All for Oil and the Wives' Revolt. The fourth is the inimitable Professor Gigi Dara of the Niger Delta University. He's a professor of English, specializing in oral literature, discussing J.P. Clark, Voyager of Our Folkways. And finally is Professor Tanwiro Jaidi, who will be speaking to us, discussing what we don't know yet about J.P. Clark's writings. Ladies and gentlemen, may I at this time yield the floor to Dr. Nduka Otiono to speak on the topic. You have 20 minutes, please, and I have the hammer. If you don't stop at 20 minutes, I will hammer you, Nduka. Yes, over to you. Please unmute yourself, unmute your mic. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Hope Gaga, for that introduction. And I'd also like to thank you and your colleagues for putting together this very important celebration of the life of J.P. Clark 1 year after his passing. I would like to acknowledge all the distinguished scholars, writers in the house today, some of whom were my professors at the University of Ibadan. So I'll be speaking on J.P. Clark Bekederemo's poetic expeditions in mortality. And what I will do is based on a preliminary, preliminary remarks based on the more extended study that I have been doing. And I'd like to begin with an epigraph. You, and this is from J.P. Clark's poem, Lands of the Gods. You who gave me a lot from paradise would not let me build, come construction day. Two rivers have their trysting place, a strong selling point you considered, were in it a city, but there were, in the maze of his own country, in the river Niger Delta, and over it, a god sits brooding. Clark's early life was marked, at the University of Ibadan by his intellectual and cultural activism, which culminated in the founding of the Horn and the Mbari movement, which my friend, the poet, scholar, and journalist Obinwa Kama is currently writing a book on. I can't begin to go back into any backgrounds about JP, given the preliminary remarks that have been made, both by his colleagues and the students, colleagues at the University of, the chair of the Department of English at the University of Ibadan, and then of course, a classmate at Government College. But it's important to note how J.P. Clark's early life was marked by this intellectual and cultural activism. Ever the literary activist, Wakama in his 2020 tribute to Clark, published in Vanguard newspaper, draws attention to some highlights of Clark's Ibadan years. And I make these highlights as a way of showing the progression and his reflections on mortality. How the young man, full of life, the America, towards the end of his life begins to brood and reflect on mortality. So ever the literary archivist, Nwakama in the 2020 tribute to Clark, published in Vanguard newspaper, draws attention to some highlights of Clark's Ibadan years. These include a literary debate with his best friend, and I find this really, really interesting, Kayode Jibo at the University College Ibadan, one evening in 1956 in the common room of Teda Hall. Those of you who are Ibadan based know Teda Hall. As Obi writes, and I quote him, it went on and all, this debate went on and all till so very late in the night, and ended only when both of them, exhausted by dispute, broke down weeping from the very intensely aroused emotions. Even the point of the dispute, viewed against the light of hindsight, would be very amusing, and I think some of us might be amused by it, even possibly light to contemporary scrutiny. But it's about which musical, and the debate was about which musical instrument or interpretation of a classical composer by two different performers was better than the other. Look at that. The point of this is, of course, to situate J.P. Clark's, what Obi Nwakama calls brash, short-fused, and eminently as being choleric. In furtherance of the profiling of the effervescent writer in his youth, Nwakama highlights a spectacular incident. And I quote him, the Mbari Artists and Writers Club had been formed in 1961, and Clark was a leading figure of the Mbari movement. His poetry collection, Poems, had been published by the Mbari Press. His tragic play, Song of a Goat, had been performed to devastating effect and wide reception at the Mbari Courtyard Theatre in Ibadan, with Soyinka, the Nobel laureate, playing the lead role of Zifa. And this is a very spectacular point of it, and how much we can think about this effervescence to which I refer. His slaughtering of the scapegoat on the stage had such an electric effect that it set the cultural tongues wagging for weeks among Ibadan's educated theater-going classes. It was shocking, and Clark liked the shock. Ibadan, vast and languid over the 7 rolling hills, was a well-knit community, but it was also split between the old and the new, a fact captured powerfully in Clark's now famous epigrammatic poem, Ibadan. Social life was intense, and Clark's writing thrived. But Nwakama's declaration that, and I quote, in his later works, Clark lost his edge. It felt prolix and unconvincing. It was without doubt measured and imposed upon by the effluxion of time, misses a key factor in Clark's evolution in his later works, which is what fascinates me more in my presentation. And it is indeed what Nwakama calls the effluxion of time, but more specifically, it is the role of sleep and old age, to borrow the title of one of Clark's latter poems. The obsession, and I use this advisedly, with aging was further marked by another collection of this period entitled Once Again a Child. It seems more than coincidental then that in the latter collections of poems, the poetic voice of renowned first-generation modern African poet and octogenarian J.P. Clark Pekederomo morphed into more somber reflections on the petroculture's victimhood of his homeland in Niger Delta, which formed the backdrop of a great deal of his writing, as well as on the questions of mortality. The publication of his collection, A Lot from Paradise, in 1999, after a decade of silence following the publication of Mandela and other poems, signaled this phase of sustained thematic engagement with personal and communal existential predicaments. A Lot from Paradise not only broke a decade of silence by the poet, it inaugurated Clark Pekederomo's most prolific phase in a creative career that spanned over 60 years of publishing in various genres of literature. From the rich harvest of the Heideggerian period for the poet, which rolled out like rapid fire from a machine gun, we now come to 3 collections which best tackle the subject matter of this presentation. And the collections are the ones I have mentioned. A Lot from Paradise, published in 1999, Of Sleep and Old Age, published in 2003, and Once Again a Child, published in 2004. So you see the rapid fire that I talk about. In the extended form of this paper, these preliminary remarks from which these preliminary remarks are adapted, I examine Clark Pekederomo's metaphysical exploration of the rites of passage and the various facets of aging and dying from both the African and Western perspectives. While critiquing the depopulation of the creeks through oil exploitation, the poet's lens zooms into the metaphysical aspects of life through meditations on death, evident in the early part of the section, Emissaries, in A Lot of Paradise, and in the haunting poems, The Company of the Dead and A Prayer. But it's in the second part of A Lot, as in much of Once Again a Child and of Sleep and Old Age, that Clarke's contemplation of death and mortality is most concrete. The philosophical bent assumes a more poignant angle as the poet personal considers humanity's existential dilemmas in the poem A Song of Harlem. And then I quote, "We make so much of life here when we have no hold on it. So daily we plan for the year when we cannot see the minute," end of quote. On a personal note, I'd like to recall that during 2 episodes of separate hospitalization of my wife and I, under precarious conditions in Lagos between 2000 and 2001, the compassionate poet shared his Heideggerian reflections on beingness. His wise, witty, cynical, and generally inspiring outlook on life and being, which one also finds in the poetry, were the tonic that lubricated my will to survive. And this was when I was shot, and survived it. And we have had honor of hosting JP Clarke and Tanura Ojaide, who I'm so glad to see here today, in our Lagos home in September 1999, with then younger writers, many of whom are now in their middle age, in attendance. In a fascinating paper titled Aging Poets and Dead Anxiety, Art as Existential Therapy in JP Clarke's Of Sleep and Old Age, Issa Garuba rightly highlights, quote, the final words from the poet, which are translatable to his acceptance of death, as embodied in the last poem of the volume, My Last Testament. Garuba further notes that the words are, and I quote Garuba, constitute a therapy for the poet against the terror and anxiety of death upon his perception and a recognition of its inevitability and immanence, end of quote. And there's this poem, and I'm just looking towards ending, that poet that is published in Full Tide, Collected Poems, 2010. This is to my family. Do not take me, and this is very much well quoted, especially in many of the tributes following JP Clarke's demise last year. This is to my family. Do not take me to a mortuary. Do not take me to a church, whether I die in or out of the town, but take me home to my own and to lines and tunes tested on the waves of time. Let me lie in my place on the Kiaboro River. If Muslims do it in a day, you certainly can do it in 3, avoiding blood and waste. And whatever you do after, my 3 daughters and my son, by the only wife I have, do not fight over anything I may be pleased to leave behind. Needless to add that upon his death, his family obeyed this will. And I'd like to close by referencing the journalist Mike Jimon's beautiful tribute to JP Clarke titled Paddle On to Great Beyond JP Clarke. And I quote Mike, "Nothing seems more apt and sublime than giving the impression of a lone paddler in his canoe, disappearing from view between an expanse of water and an ever-receding horizon, never to be seen again. For JP, there couldn't have been a more befitting metaphor for a man who was born in the riverine area, grew up and lived in it for a greater part of his early years." And that's my end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nduka Otieno, for your excellent presentation. I'm sorry for that breakdown in transmission. We had connectivity problems. Yes, we just heard Dr. Otieno speak to us on poetic expeditions in mortality. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Mabel Ewerioma, who is speaking on discussing JP Clarke towards an agenda for femocracy. I yield the mic to you, Prof. Kindly unmute your mic, yes.
Thank you very much. I've done that. Thank you very much, Professor Igaga. And let me not say I'm intimidated or starstruck by the eminent professors I see here today. I wish to say a big thank you for the opportunity that I have been given today to air my opinion on J.P. Clark. Thank you very much once again. I begin by saying that a multi-systems approach will take a look at the role of women in politics, be it personal or group, with the intention to assess and challenge discriminatory practices in order to ensure an open society. In regards to democracy, governance is pivotal, where soft skills by women are displayed in the manner of political, social, economic, and historical enracinement or enracinement in the French pronunciation. Democratic women are both public and private people fighting for the ideals that help to generate an African power ethos in texts. And so I wouldn't want to, commit the crime of ascribing democracy to the works of J.P. Clark alone. For as Wole Soyinka had campaigned against attributing one concept to a particular playwright. According to him, in Who is Afraid of Election Oba, when a mere word is used to do service for a number of different concepts, acts, situations, etc., the exclusive attribution of one particular concept of it to the author is a fraudulent act by any person. Therefore, I make bold to say that democracy as a concept could be, exercised or looked at from different perspectives and from the works of different dramatists. Because in this presentation, I wish to limit myself to the plays of J.P. Clark. And so apart from, agreeing not to commit the crime of fraudulent ascription, the need to excavate hidden meanings in a text further helps to facilitate exegetic acts in that text. And so the questions have made it necessary for one to attempt, as much as possible, a democratic look, at some of the plays of J.P. Clark. In June 1986, I had turned in a long essay in fulfillment of the requirement for the THA 441 Special Author 2, taught by Dr. M.M. Umukoro, as he then was, now Professor M.M. Umukoro, who recently retired from the University of Ibadan after meritorious service. The focus was on the female essence in the plays of J.P. Clark. 35 years after, and sometimes in between those years, one has taken another look at some of his texts with a view to confirm some of those early hesitant views on his works held by this speaker. With yet some clarity, assessing the issues of governance that is placed disclosed through the lens of democracy is one opportunity that I'm grateful to the organizers of this memorial ceremony for. Thank you again for this chance. When dramatists have precognition and are able to infuse the plots of their plays with future events or ideas that seem fleeting at first, but which coalesce into more realities in the future of futures, more analytical possibilities continue to open up their plays for exegesis using recent critical tools and ideologies. This is the experience of critics where the plays of Clark and other Nigerian playwrights are concerned. And it is as if the plays continue to reveal contemporaneity. In the opinion of Anne Ferguson, the women's movement has created a rising consciousness of the social inequalities forced on mothers, forced on women by our current social arrangements of parenting, where we have masculinity and sex-affective production. And so I make bold again to say that one is not certain of Clark's willingness or unwillingness to create a democratic space and system. When we look at democracy and the diversity of feminist action or women-centered proclivities for unrest, insurgency, and subversion, we see his place like Ozidi and the Wives' Revolt. And through his works, we note that the leader of the unrest does not have to be a king or a regent like Wazobia. Of all the women scripted by Clark like Titi, Koko, Oria, Oriame, Orukorere, Fiobode, Mitowodo, amongst others, none had a stool of formal authority except within the home or community. Yet these women transformed their lives without stealth, but deliberately. And so the display of hegemony in Clark's plays is not necessary for force or change to be created, as these plays are translatable in mass revolt, be the action messianic or third-party force, in mystical domination, as we see in Oriame, in the highly violent and vengeful play Ozidi. Clark's investment in political power for his women is therefore double-edged. We have the weak, the powerful, the docile, strong, and even fierce. And so the democratic impulse may be imaginary as it sounds out in contemporary plays, especially when we try to, tie democracy with revolutionary aesthetics and in a way that it highlights utopia in the text and, entrenches the role of memory in remembering how women fought for liberation, fought for independence in the past, and how the ambivalence of democracy plays out in the works of J.P. Clark. Traditionally, we may consider the subjugation of women as normal. We see characters who challenge this subjugation, and then in conceptualizing the aberration of insurgency and women-centeredness, we see the new norm in the plays by J.P. Clark, where to many he committed a U-turn. And so the dominance of women in the text by Clark tells us that his women may be non-participants in the transnational politics of the time. And in recent plays, we see newer texts by writers like Ayakoroma, Binebai, Peter Omoko, Boniface Anyanwu, Tosin Tume, Gloria Ernest Samuel, among others, and how they try to, display democratic impulses in rural and urban spaces. And we may say that the pertinent question asked by Femi Oshofison in J.P. Clark, A Voyage, his autobiography on Clark, he asked a pertinent question. So what will happen when the poet goes? One answer is that which is being done here today, a look at his plays from different perspectives. And so on democracy, Hester Einstein says that what was striking about the Democrats was their undisguised commitment to feminism and the acceptance of this approach within bureaucracy. This was not a generation of women who, to win senior positions in government, had to conform to the reigning ethos and disguise their personal convictions. At another level, democracy is seen as the opposite to feminism. because it showcases women who are fake in their convictions, who do not really deserve the positions of acclaim that they hold in society, mainly because these are women considered to be social chameleons. And so looking at democracy in J.P. Clark's plays, three writers are used to foreground my essay today. The first is the feminist of repute, Amina Mama. The second is Hessa Ensenstein, and the third is Anne Ferguson. These three writers display some ambivalence. Of course, some would see democracy as an opportunity to entrench women, to highlight the dominance of women, the rulership of women as against the patriarchal, insights that we have to come to terms with in the plays of J.P. Clark. And so Mama believes that femocrats are women who side with the elites in power, who enjoy who lap up, the advantages of power, and so use that to oppress other women and align with the patriarchs in the society, rather than create that open society that is liberational, that would make women, be free. And because most of the women in the plays of J.P. Clark are local women, one sees this important aspect and therefore asks, what can femocracy do? If democracy is governance by the feminine or women, and if it denotes the exploitation of power by women in the vicinity of power, like social chameleon spouses, first ladies, relations of people in government to their own benefits and not to the benefits of the masses, we now ask, how can the small clique of dominant women help in making society a better place? So we look at the wives' revolt, for example, where we see women who decide to, campaign for equity and justice, and decide that as it is, the domesticity of the women apart, the clarity of vision to fight for the gains of oil exploration in the community was their right. And so the democratic ideals, therefore, could be anti-masculinity or masculinities, and the doggedness for retribution, the need to fight within the traditional context of dominance, makes it possible to look at the absent presence of women, where, apart from the deliberate insurgency, Clark depicts a foreknowledge of the politics of women in nation building and the requirement for justice. Therefore, the approach by women for a Niger Delta political economy built on equity, prompted by the call for transparency, is therefore welcome. And so through leadership and governance by women, through the processes of query, these women, through democratic ideals, were not satisfied with what Okoro and the other men proposed as the formula for financial responsibility. They asked questions, they revisited what the men expected them to accept, they revised their history, and they tried to rewrite that history. The crux of democracy in the wives' revolt is therefore about grassroots activism for fiscal reforms, the type that we would want women of today take up. And so to subject the play to further scrutiny, if Clark wrote the wives' revolt, the question is, must the women who know their rights be wives? Must all the women be wives? What if we had a revolt of unmarried women? Would they have had the impetus to be accorded, much respect in the society? And so If the revolt benefits the women, I believe, looking at the negative aspect of democracy that Amina Mama upholds, Koko and the other insurgent women must have, succeeded in that revolt because of their proximity to the men, an advantage which they exploited to their gain by using sex as a major force to make the men bow to their wishes. In Ozidi, most of the gods in the play are women, yet they fight against their own. And so in this play, one considers the boomerang of democracy, evident because in the myths and legends of the people, the women are strongly motivated for, a revenge against the mother of Ozidi Senior. What we know through the play is that the supernatural woman who nurtures Ozidi, who returns to Orua to wreak vengeance on his father's assassins, is one that is struck down during one of the fights. And so to Albert Ashaulu, Oriame is destroyed by the very agent she has used to effect her plan for revenge. Therefore, the Ozidi drama, although is a study in extreme physical violence, according to Matthew Umukoro, much to our chagrin, such violence is on a daily occurrence in Nigeria today. In the raft, women are not visible in the text, but what we see are women being referred to, being linked to the national crisis, and being seen as victims of the tragic impulse written by J.P. Clark. In A Song of a Goat, we see a Biere like Nigeria, robust on the outside, but with much turbulence inside. Another similarity with the playwright's nation is the penchant for the reactive rather than the proactive. The sacrifice could have been preventive if carried out earlier instead of the pursuit of a curative one. And so, the woman, Ebiere, in Song of a Goat, is also linked to Titi in The Masquerade, who is shot because she is projected as a revolting youth. And so, looking at society, the recent EndSARS protest provides an insight into the geriatric intolerance of youthful dispositions. Why shoot a young person for deciding for a preferred spouse from another ethnic group, community, social status, faith, or any other distinguishing feature? Divisive identity politics continue to decimate the life of women in many texts. And so the class and xenophobic inhibitions exhibited by Diribi and Umuko, Titi's parents, also have repercussions. And so if we ask ourselves, is it possible for us to have any agenda for democracy? One would say yes. Like I said earlier on, we must, appreciate the rule by the feminine, be it autocratic, whether it runs parallel to the dictates of feminisms or not, whether it supports patriarchal oligarchy or not. What we know is that democracy should be highlighted as participation by women, as non-violence, as mass awareness or mass awareness creation. And according to Goredema and Chiagora, we should eschew democracy because it creates fake heroines. We should also, work against democracy because it proposes an amnesia of history where the real women fighters are forgotten, where historical facts are distorted. Therefore, in being amenable for democratic discussions, the plays by J.P. Clark reflect a social world of women and men that is not shielded from political processes. The highly political dramatist J.P. Clark tells us, therefore, that democracy is an agenda for the present and for the future. It therefore seeks the recognition of all women, irrespective of their status, that often shuts out the struggles of ordinary women or people who are excluded from the power equation often. And so I conclude and say that I commend Clark for highlighting Mitowodo, who referred to Nigeria as a night market, a politically conscious woman, and therefore propose that the ambivalence of democracy in the works of J.P. Clark could be studied in such a way that women, as the real fighters for the emancipation of women, are projected as laborers for justice and not cosmetic agitators who align with oppressors to perpetuate male hegemony with filthy lucre in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much on your talk on democracy. We are going to have our next speaker. Just before that, I'm inviting Dr. Oloko, who is an associate professor in the Department of English, to read a poem by J.P. Clark, U.S. Exits the World. Patrick Oloko.
Thank you very much. J.P. Clark is always very cryptic in the way he does his poems. And of course, you will easily recall Ibadan and how very iconic that poem is. This one is titled U.S. Exits the War. And in parentheses, it says the Donald Trump show. Very short. I begin. Today at nightfall, the moon also showed another face. From ear to ear, a smile, telling the world it can still wait a while to see the final face. The noise is of a race split. Nothing up now is about to fall.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Oloko. We have saved some time, but we still have to manage time well. Please, if you have comments and questions, place them in the chat box and the speakers will respond. I'd like to recognize some of our very senior distinguished persons here, not in any particular order. Professor Ayobanjo, thank you very much. Professor Luo Bafemi, Professor Godwin Sogolo, Professor Tony Falola, Ambassador God knows Igali, Professor Remy Oriaku, Professor Dan Izeraye, Professor Akache Zigbo, Professor Ayobang Boshe, Professor Duroni, President of NOW, Honorable Wale Okeduron, and Professor Akache Zigbo, yes. So please, we will take more recognitions. Our next speaker is Professor Saint Bilika, discussing an eco-critical discourse of J.P. Clark's All for Oil and the Wives' Revolt. I yield the mic to you, Professor Bilika. Kindly unmute, Professor Bilika, unmute your mic and let's hear you. Are you there? Professor?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at a unique occasion like this. A remembrance of a great Nigerian writer and academic, late Professor J.P. Clark. Like you said, I'm going to look at two of J.P. Clark's plays from an eco-critical perspective. ecological issues have become very prominent these days in the discourse of literature. Now, what is it all about? It is about, it is about ecological or cultural concerns about how writers approach the issue of environment. Man, as an architect of environmental crisis, is very, very destructive. He's the most destructive animal on earth. His fanatical passion to conquer nature and make it obey his whims and caprices have led to deforestation, degradation, denudation of the landscape. His desire to build cities, to build roads, factories, and the search for minerals in the deep bowels of the earth and such other similar activities of the Homo sapiens have created a lot of damage to Mother Earth. The earth and the human race stand on the threshold of extinction due to the activities of man in search of wealth and resources. The global quest of who controls the world's resources has left not only the ecosystem plundered, but also made the plundered regions and its inhabitants the wretched of the earth. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that man's adventurous and sometimes reckless actions constitute a global catastrophe to planet Earth, and unless we change our attitude, our ways, and refuse to be part of the problem, humanity will be endangered seriously. Now, man's action, our positive action can stem the tide of damnation and human destruction. So all hands must be on deck. Now, I try to look first at the definition of eco-criticism and in an ecological writing. And I quoted Glofetti, who says, eco-criticism is the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. And as feminist criticism examines language and literature from a gender-conscious perspective, and Marxist critics brings an awareness of modes of production and economic class to the reading of text. Eco-criticism takes an earth-centered approach to literary studies. Eco-critic takes as its subject the interconnections between nature and culture, specifically the cultural artifacts of language and literature. As a critical stand, it has one foot in literature and the other on land. As a theoretical discourse, it negotiates between the humans and the non-humans. So eco-criticism is as much of the entire ecosphere where, to cite commoners, the first law of ecology, everything is connected to everything else. That is to say that literature plays along the material world in what Glofetti refers to as an immensely complex global system in which energy, matter, and ideas interact. What am I saying? What I'm trying to say here is that eco-critics try to look at the relationship between literature and nature, literature and the environment, and they try to pass some comments by cautioning man that if man is not careful, his activities would constitute a danger to humanity. Now, what I'll try to do is I'll try to look at the two plays of J.P. Clark, all for oil and the Wild's Reward. But before doing that, I tried to look at the attitude, that is the response of African writers. And when I mean African writers, I'm talking about poets, I'm talking about playwrights, I'm talking about novelists. Now, I've tried to see how they have responded to this issue of nature writing, or what we call green writing. African writers' response to nature writing or eco-criticism is fairly new to African literary critics. In fact, the whole theoretical construct regarding, eco-criticism is also new. It started in the 60s, and then by the 70s, 90s, 80s, and 90s, it blossomed to what it is today. In fact, recently, Professor Marcelo and Gesem Bachaga have edited a book on eco-criticism in Nigeria, trying to draw attention to this nascent, area of study in literature. And so it is new in Africa. And but if you look at the works of some of African writers, you'll find out that Black critics and writers have traditionally combined nature writing, land issues, and landscape themes that are pertinent to national and local cultural claims, and that also function as pastoral reminiscences or even projections of a golden age when many of the environmental evils resulting from colonialism and the exploitation of indigenous resources have been remediated. Now, coming from a passionate cause of romanticizing African environment and culture before the advent of colonialism and exploitation of the rich resources of Africa, these writers presented man in harmony with nature, where even when rumblings and hiccups emerged, they were easily nipped in the bud through, cross-cultural marriages, kinship, and the solid African communitarian values, where everybody is his neighbor's keeper. Now, I've tried to look at the way some Nigerian writers have also, looked at this aspect. And I have said that Nigerian playwrights have given a good account of themselves recently in response to this issue of green writing. I've given examples of playwrights like Ahmed Yerima in Hard Ground, Barclay's Ayakroma in A Chance to Survive, Ben Binibai's Drama of Death, Greg Mbajogu's Woke Up Everyone, Isia Bairobi's Hangman Also Die, and of recent, somebody who wrote something on climate of change, one Idoma chap called what was his name again? Ilaiguame, yes. He wrote a play called Climate of Change. And this is one play that has really addressed itself to the issue of climate change in Nigeria. Now, also I gave some examples in Kenya where Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Ali Mazrui have consistently drawn attention to the issue of land grabbing, and land distribution, land alienation in Kenya. Ngugi has done this particularly in some of his novels and plays. And then in Nigeria too, you have playwrights like Femi Oshofisan who have addressed these issues, and you have a good poet and playwright who has addressed this issue. I'm talking about I'm talking about Neo Shundara, yes, who has addressed this issue in his poems. He can be regarded as somebody who has given adequate, attention to the issue of nature writing. I also cited Ken Saro-Wiwa, even though not so many of his writings denote what can really be called nature writing. His eco-activism gave him a lot of prominence, particularly when he was talking about the despoilation of Ogoniland by, the major oil companies exploiting land in Ogoniland. Now, from this, I then came to lay emphasis on the works of J.P. Clark, particularly these two plays. Okay, so I'll try to look at the way nature is represented in these two plays, whether the physical setting has an impact on the principal characters, and to see whether the values expressed in these two plays is in consonance with ecological wisdom. That is what I've tried to do. Now, I've looked at J.P. Clark from the perspective of a poet and a playwright, and to some extent a critic. Now, some critics like Olobafemi has looked at his work and said to some extent that he is a Greco-Roman playwright, particularly when examining plays like The Masquerade, Song of a Goat, The Raft, and to some extent Ozidi. Now, in his plays, that is to say that he followed the Aeschylean and Sophoclean tragedies where fate and predestination determine the fall and the fall of a tragic hero. One thing we cannot take away from J.P. Clark is that the fact that he has effectively used the oral tradition of his own people, as a launchpad for many of his works, particularly the plays. Now, if we look at these two plays, we can define one thing. That is that in All for Oil, J.P. Clark takes a look at the history of his people, particularly during the era of the Royal Niger Company, when they were buying palm oil, trading in palm oil with the people. Here, J.P. Clark is rehistoricizing history. He has looked at history from a different perspective, trying to say that, look, what is happening here, what happened there at that particular time was not really the true picture of what historians have presented it. That what happened really was, a matter of Britain coming in, using the Royal Niger Company and using some interested personnel like Chief Nume to knock heads together, bringing what the British preferred to call the indirect rule system, whereby they use Africans, but then were able to make sure that the ethnic nationalities were not able to unite to fight a common cause, that is British exploitation and oppression. Now, in that play, while Nume has allied as a stooge with the likes of Frederick Lugard and Colonel Mawson, Ambaka Bekederemo, with his other people, Shingu and Chief Egbe, are in one group trying to oppose the Royal Niger Company on the other hand, and the British administration on the other, for land grabbing and for certain other anti-activities against the people of the Niger Delta. Now, how does J.P. Clark capture the issue of green writing? Now, I say, although All for Oil is not particularly focused on environmental nor ecological issues, the impact of palm oil exploitation on the ethnic nationalities of the Niger Delta, the manipulation of the political elites by the British colonialists, and the forceful acquisition of land impacted negatively on the culture and life of the people. For one, the setting of the play is pastoral, showcasing the Niger Delta landscape, the creeks, the estuaries, the rivers on which boats and ferries ply. The setting also brings to the fore the flora and fauna of the area that once accommodated the Royal Niger Company, who established and exploited the Niger Delta people of their resources, that is palm oil and timber. Ironically, besides generating wealth for the few traditional elites and aborigines, the palm oil trade further divided the ethnic nationalities, that is Ijaw, Ichekiri, Urobo, Kwani, Isoko, because the British appointed particularly this man, Chief Noma, as their own agent, and he violated all the traditional and customary laws of the people and made sure that he represented the interests of the British and his own personal interest. Now, this was done deliberately by the British to prevent the ethnic nationalities to collectively rise up against British tyrannical rule in the Niger Delta. In the play, the conflict is between two principal characters, Chief Numa and Chief Bekaderemo. Why Chief Numa allied with the British to exploit and misrule his people as a stooge, Chief Bekaderemo stood with his people to ensure that the palm oil trade was responsibly managed and the people properly governed. As Clark has noted in his prophetic notes, he says, All for Oil presents a powerful panorama of the players in the original drama of creation of Nigeria. Sir later Lord Frederick Lugard and Colonel MC Morehouse, headed by Chief Dore Numa, a local agent for the British in their way of aggression against Nana Olomu the Chekiri, 1894, Oba of Aromen, 1897, represent the trade and its largest trade and middlemen. Its largest trade and middlemen in the Western Niger Delta. Chief Bekaderemo, that is Ambaka Deremo, his friend, Chief Egbe, and the lawyer Egerton Shingo, leader of the Nigerian Bar and first elected member, the Legislative Council of Nigeria, 1922 to 1926, give voice to the interests and yearnings of the local people as it has never been heard and reported before in the presentation of Nigeria's history. That is to say, as I earlier said, that besides historicizing history, Clark's play captures the environmental depopulation as well as the loss of lives in the reckless wars that were fought, wars of conquest that were fought by the British colonial authority. And then the illegally and fraudulently acquired, land through their agent, stooge, and collaborator, Chief Numa. And this land is linked to the colonial ideology of exploitation. Consequently, the land was destabilized and things began to fall apart. On the other hand, Clark presents Bekaderemo as an opposition leader, pursuing an anti-colonial agenda and rejecting colonialism and forceful acquisition of land. Land to Clark here signifies both economic and political stability. Its degradation has ushered in instability. In other words, the land in itself represents, nature. Besides that, it represents what the people feed on. It is land that people feed on. And so through the activities of the British, they introduced certain elements of destabilization. The people themselves were dissatisfied and of course, they were fighting against themselves and unnecessary competition amongst themselves, which did not bring any peace, particularly to the Niger Delta at that particular time. So the acquisition of land without the consent of the ethnic nationalities of the Niger Delta disinherits them of communal ownership. This introduces a new capitalist ideology which displays traditional African communalism and values. Therefore, the palm oil trade of the early 19th century by the Royal Niger Company is linked to political and economic agenda in Nigeria. Thus, Clark, like Ngugi, linked the issue of land, environment, history, and nature. He links it, the issue of land and nature, its forceful acquisition to societal instability and the colonial agenda and vision of Britain in Nigeria. Therefore, it can be argued that in agitating against the colonial policy of land grabbing in Niger Delta, Clark has embraced a pastoral vision of a pre-colonial African society whose order.
Can you begin to wind up, please?
Okay. Now, I said that in the White Revolt, the issue here is the exploitation of oil and how it despoils the land and aquatic life. Oil spillage, gas flaring, this activity disturb and distort planet Earth. Global warming, depletion of the ozone layer, weather changes, landslides, hurricanes, seismic blasts, discharge of untreated effluents into the water bodies, water pollution, pounds and oil spillage has great effect on the environment. So here, J.P. Clark is not only dramatizing the issue of women, trying to agitate for a fair treatment, equal treatment with the men, particularly in the sharing of the oil money brought by the oil company, but also drawing attention to the fact that the activities of the companies have really disempowered first the women through sharing of the oil money and denial to rear goats, which amounts to economic strangulation, and that the ban on rearing of goats is contrary to nature, as goats are part of the environment. Humans and animals cohabit the same environment, and the environment plays a key role in their sustenance and survival. Now, in conclusion, I say Clark may not be considered an ecological and environmental artist, nor activist, in the true sense of eco-drama. But some of his plays and poems take on issues of ecology and environment, particularly land. Land and the environment are basic sources of survival and sustenance. When the land is disturbed, the people and their activities are disturbed. Therefore, political and economic emancipation and stability will enhance prosperity and a healthy land policy, since the earth is bonded to all aspects of society. I believe this is also Clark's position in these two plays. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Thank you very much, Professor Saint Belika, for that detailed presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very scholarly and penetrating. Professor Karen Aribisala is in the audience. Khadija George, Professor Mama Ebu Clark, of course, is there. The next speaker ought to be Professor Gigi Dara, but he's just sent me a text that he's on the raft, still searching for where he can get network coverage. So may I, at this point, invite Professor Tanuri Ojaide, who's speaking on discussing what we do not know yet about J.P. Clark's writings. Professor Ojaide, I yield the mic to you, please.
Good day, everybody.
Good day.
Good day, sir.
Good day.
Yeah.
All the way from America.
My topic is, what don't we know yet about J.P. Clark's writings? I think there's a difference between that and I want to say that it's assumed that much has been written about J.P. Clark, but so much has been written about him. But in my opinion, there's much more to be done about his works. his work, to me, has not generated enough curiosity when you think about the lot of work he has done in poetry, in plays, his memoir, and his writing. And I see that most of the time, J.P. Clark is lumped up when they're discussing, well, when they discuss Niger Delta literature now, those writers who were the pioneers, or when you discuss Civil War literature or poetry, you discuss J.P. Clark. When you discuss the modernist, you discuss J.P. Clark. And when you talk about the social consciousness in literature, in his later works, in the poetry and his plays. But I think there's much more to be done about J.P. Clark. It's true, you can approach J.P. Clark as a post-colonial writer. Also, in that case, it's in a group of post-colonial writers in which you can mention Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, and others. Also, Clark is often also lumped in a group, what Chinwezu called the Euro-modernist. These are African writers, Christopher Kibo again, and Wole Soyinka among them, and the African modernists because of his Hopkinsian disease, as he calls his use of strong rhythm. But I think a poet who has tried to remain so relevant to writing, very relevant to every phase. In so many years he has written, I think he deserves to be applauded for his commitment to craft and the artistic mission which he has engendered. So what I want to do in my paper is not quite an academic paper in the sense of talking about only one topic, but I'm going to lead you into possible and newer insights into his body of work. And as a last speaker, perhaps a last speaker, when you think of those who have spoken before me, I may contradict some of those who have spoken before me, or may repeat some of the things they've said. So despite all this group lumping of J.P. Clark as this, I think it should not be straight-laced as a Euro-modernist, because even when you look at his early poems, like Night Rain, Read in a Tide, you look at Streamside Exchange, you see that the language he uses in those poems is so simple. And it seems to be a poet who is out from the very beginning to communicate a message. You can see that this is very different from the poet who says, after I've been formed and be formed, and who in an interview, that's Okibo, said that he doesn't write for non-poets. Here's a poet who wants to communicate meaning. So communicating meaning with strong images seems to be his main force, even from the very beginning. So I'm trying to say that the diction of his poetry, especially the early poetry, even through casualties, when you read those poems, that's not the diction of modernist writing with fragmented language, with very elitist type of references and so forth. And I want to say that, in fact, even though it could be termed as a modernist, he's more of a bridge between his generation and the generation that follows him, that is called the alternative generation. That's the generation of people like Ni, my good friend, Odia Ofemun, and myself. Because if the aim of that generation is to communicate meaning, and that's what Clark has done. So it should not be pigeonholed as a modernist poet, but as a bridge between the modernist and the alternatives. I think this is very important because I think I saw Toyi Falola's comment there, what happens after? I think it's important for us to know that people should not be pigeonholed. People could even be relevant at any period of history. Somebody could have written 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and could still be very relevant. So I think J.P. Clark's writing is as relevant as that of the generation after him and even after, even in the writing itself. So one of the things, again, I want to say about J.P. Clark, if you look at his poems, like such as Iwie, there's a poem called Iwie. I don't think many people have bothered to check what's the meaning of Iwie, really. That's an honorable word, which means a call of the helpless. When somebody is helpless, you call as if you are being oppressed, Iwie. And also his essay on Uje. It shows how much he has researched into oral literature. And you can compare this to what people like Kofi Anyido has done in ever literature, Jacques Mapanje in his literature, my humble self, even in Uje itself. So one can look at J.P. Clark from many angles. And I feel that looking at what he read, what he researched into, and what he read, I think they are very relevant to the criticism of his work, whether it's poetry or plays. In fact, his embrace of Uje, which is an honorable tradition of oral poetic performance in which people compose songs to sing against each other in alternate years. His work there, which he first published in Nigeria Magazine, 1965, in fact, could say to be a trajectory of academic and creative works for people like Gigi Dara, who did his research in Uje. Understand even at the time he read Dara's dissertation, and also somebody like me, that many of us are following his footsteps with writing scholarly essays on Uje, but also being influenced, like in my writing, people say, and I know that, being influenced by Uje in creative works, in poetry, like songs of myself, or Delta blues and home songs. In fact, most of those home songs were deliberate, were composed in the manner of Uje. So one should not just leave J.P. Clark to what is just there. I think it's important to look at what he has read, what he has done, so that it could give us a better way of studying the deep meaning in his work. Another point I want to make is that there's the tendency to read him as an echo poet dramatist, which the last presenter has done. But to me, it's more of the poet of the environment as nature, the environment as nature, in the manner of Gabriel Kara or Otobo Tekere, rather than a poet, the echo poet of man as the Anthropocene, trying to exploit nature and destroy natural resources. I will encourage future critics to spend some time examining that aspect of his poetry, rather than, it looks a little strange that if you take him as an echo poet or echo dramatist, it's a little strange, and just see him as a nature poet who promotes the environment, the nature, what he says about it, a read in the tide, making philosophical statements with nature. I think that itself is something. Much as J.P. Clark is also well known as a national writer, his works also can be seen in the direction of belonging to minority discourse. I'm saying this from the fact that much of his work, everything is centered around the Niger Delta. And if the Niger Delta is a minority area, a region, so in a way, his works will also be critical works interrogating these poems and plays. Could also examine whether his work fits into minority discourse or not. Rather paradoxically, his works also, of course, fall into national literature, that doesn't need any explanation. They also fall into African literature. But I have not seen much of J.P. Clark's works discussed as world literature. And I feel that his deep understanding of human nature, as in Song of a Goat and Uzidi, put him in the category of writers whose discussion of human experiences cut across cultures and deserves a place in world literature. What happens in Song of a Goat? It cuts across cultures. Even Uzidi, the struggle there, the epic struggle there deserves to be. So that I think it could also be pertinent to look at J.P. Clark as look at his work as part of world literature, in the same manner that works like Things Fall Apart or Death and the King's Horseman also fit into world literature. One of the seminal works of J.P. Clark, which I think is not adequately addressed, is America the America. I know people have mentioned it. I think it needs more study, and it reveals an irrepressible aspect of Clark that colleagues talk about it, people talk about it, but it's not much discussed when it comes to criticism. He's abruptly abandoning his fellowship in the United States, and his refusal to be cartoed by the officials. It shows something in him which needs to be seen. Of course, one could argue, does that influence his reputation as a writer in the West or in the United States, or just anything? What is important is that the work needs to be read together with his other works to unravel how that personality shows in his poetry, in his drama, and other writings he has done. I also feel that we can read J.P. Clark through a historicist approach. What do we learn about his period from his works? It's not just enough to look at casualties as just a war or something. What does it show about his works? If we look at the State of the Union, what does that show in his work? And also, in fact, later play like The Wives' Revolt. What do those plays show about how people have evolved in their thinking? I heard Professor Mabel Evier-Roman talked about democracy. The point is that you have to take note that people evolve over ages. Even in areas where feminism is so high, these are areas where women were not allowed to vote for some time. How has Nigeria, or how have Nigerians developed and changed their attitude in the highly patriarchal society to acknowledge, to accept that women are as good as men, and they can contribute, whether they belong to the royal family, or they are ordinary people, their wives, or they are single people. So the point I'm trying to make, how does Clark show that the intellectual climate of his time, how things have moved from the beginning, at the time people were not taking note of women, to the time he wrote The Wives' Revolt. So I think that is important for us to, I think we should draw attention to how things have changed over the long period in which he has been writing. I think that also there should be really, I'm not saying that one should read about his life totally, but the entire background to foreground his creative works. I think there's a lot to be known about J.P. Clark. In fact, when I wanted to have this topic, Femi Shofiso asked me, are you going to write about his mother's people and so forth? Yes, but I think there's much to know about this to give us a deeper meaning into his attitude to women and so forth. His relationship with his mother and women generally anchors the Wives' Revolt in his feminism and the place of women in society. But the mother's village, I remember one time Gigi Dara and myself visited him in Ikeja, and I was walking on Uje, and he asked me that you must visit Eruwari, you must visit the place. You can't say you are doing something on Uje without visiting Eruwari. Of course, I went. Most of the people have forgotten the songs, most of the new generation. But I gained something there. I gained something there which other people confirmed. What was the origin of Eruwari? Eruwari among the people is a place, it's like a refuge. And in Urobo, they call it the town of Emetogbe, the town of divorcees, the town of divorcees, who originally formed the place. And there was a story that there was a time somebody was in love with, a married woman was in love with another man and fled there. I wanted to come with the man. They said, no, we didn't come here that way. You can't come to this place. So I think it's so that Eruwari itself, which shows is the setting, yes, but I think it's important to know the context, the historical and mythical context of that town to better understand J.P. Clark's attitude to women, that the place of refuge, so that his play, in fact, he's giving refuge to women to push their agenda, which I think is very important in the interpretation of that story. I've dealt more in my own readings and writings with J.P. Clark's poetry, but I've also read his plays. And I think he makes a remarkable contribution to African tragedy, especially in Uzidi. These are things that people might have written about, but what interests me is that he has the Uzidi saga, which he records, and has the drama, which he wrote, the play, which he wrote. And despite his understanding, knowing Ibadan, many years later, knowing what we studied in the Department of English, and Professor Banjo is there, I know he should have learned a lot about Greek tragedy. In fact, he learned a lot about Shakespeare with his even book, The Example of Shakespeare. But Clark is not Shakespearean, and I would feel he crystallized the notion of the African tragedy. Even though he might have started with a Song of a Goat with Greek influences, but you know, people move a lot from.
May I see that you should consider winding up now?
Yeah, I'm trying to wind up, yeah. So I feel he has a lot of contribution to the notion of the African tragedy, that while you might have been aware of other tragedies, what he tries to do, trying to write Uzidi out of the Uzidi saga, is to make something to show that this is something unique. This is not Greek, this is not Shakespearean, and this is not even Irish. I think also work should be done on J.P. Clark's, the use of language in his poetry and plays need to be done more. J.P. Clark was as fluent in Urobo, as in Ijo. His Urobo was very fluent. He knew everything in Urobo. And when he writes plays like the Biroa plays where he talks about ground pepper, Iriboto, I think he's translating directly from Urobo. But I think much work should be done on the language of his poetry. How has he any transliteration from Ijo, Urobo, and where does he do this, and what is the impact on his work? So I would say also that Clark is a deeply philosophical writer. What are the sustaining, question that should be asked, what are the sustaining ideas that frame his concept of humanity and life generally? Have scholars been able to fuse his plays, poetry, scholarship, and memoir into a holistic approach to Clark and his writings? So there's so much left for scholars to do with Clark's work to make his writings one flow of the same river. And so what don't we know yet about J.P. Clark's writings? We know so much about him, but there's still so much we can still learn from his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jaide. Thank you. You raised some critical questions. I'm sure there will be some observations and comments as we go. Now, we're coming to the end of the program, and Professor Dara has found a birth yet. So now may I invite him to speak for 20 minutes and no more, please. Professor Dara, I know you have a lot to offer, but we are racing against time now. So 20 minutes, sir. Thank you, sir. Professor Gigi, kindly unmute your mic and let's hear you. Hello, Professor Dara. While we wait for him, I'm also told that Her Excellency, Mrs. Olaomi Asheku, wife of the High Commissioner to Canada, is in the audience. You're welcome. Yes, Professor Gigi Dara. Please take note of the questions, comments on the chat box, our discussants. You may need to address them. A very valid point raised by Professor Toyin Falola, which has been alluded to by Professor Jaide. What happens after our generation is phased out? How do we maintain continuity and convert his work into a tradition? And the second question, can we not turn them into animations? Professor Dara, you have the mic. If you're still having problems with connectivity, we may now have to take comments and questions. Please indicate if you have a question by raising your hand electronically, or ask a question in the chat box. Thank you. It's been a celebration of J.P. Clark, his writing, his contribution to the literary world. To be sure, his place in the pantheon of writers in the African tradition is ensured. What is now left for us is to continue with that tradition. Yes, Professor Dara is here. I can see him as Zita. Kindly unmute. Professor Dara, I can see you as Zita, but your mic is not unmuted yet. Unmute, please. Please get ready with your questions, with your comments. Interesting perspectives on J.P. Clark Bekedemo from Professor Jaide. We tend to focus more on J.P. Clark as a creative writer than as a scholar researcher of oral literature, exemplified by his canonical Uzidi saga, which he, can I get that? Yes, Professor Dara, unmute and let's hear you. Oh dear.
I'm trying to unmute myself. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
That is very hopeful.
Yes, there is hope at last.
I've been navigating so many rivers and waterways.
All right.
Like those lumbermen in the raft.
Thank you.
Problem of yes. Thank you very much. Because of that navigation, I unfortunately missed many of the discussions, although I heard a great deal of Professor Jaide's contribution. So I would like to thank everybody who has helped to unravel the various dimensions of JP's creativity, his contribution to literature, African literature, to world literature, and then his place in Nigeria as a special, unique artist whose language, whose combination of knowledge of folk cultures and English are so well fused that you would think that he didn't belong to our environment at all. So I think we have a lot of things to learn from him, but I try to look at those aspects of folklore and experience which distinguish the Ijaw people and the Urhobo people, who are the main characters in his works. It's characterized by waterways, by water, by tropical environment, rainforest, and all the flora and fauna that make our area a different part of the world. And what J.P. Clark did was to bring this ecology, this environment, the culture, the people, and the experiences in the Niger Delta into global attention. And he did it so well that we will continue to learn from him from time to time. I said I will speak about JP as a voyager of folkways. And of course, I'm borrowing this word voyager from the typical experience of people in the Niger Delta who are navigators of riverine terrains. And voyager is also an explorer, somebody who expands frontiers. Of course, that is part of the title that Professor Femi Oshofison used in the biographical study of J.P. Clark, if I call it the voyage. So I'm trying to look at this from the point of view of how J.P.'s works, his creativity, his scholarship, and theoretical statements help to redefine indigenous cultures of Ijaw people, of Urhobo people, and other minorities in the Niger Delta. In fact, I started by looking at those poems that we learned when we were in secondary school in the 60s, in that Senano and Vincent volume of poetry, like Ninth Rain, Olokun, Streamside Exchange. Just those titles, they look so simple and innocuous, but each one conveys deep feeling, deep understanding of the typical indigenous activity that goes on in our take a look, for example, I mean, the worship of water deity, and the whole concept of wealth and the Mame water concept that were later deepened and expanded by Jaide and other poets, you know, and the whole idea of seeking fortune from the oceans, connecting us to the diaspora outlook, to slave trade, to the coming of Europeans to the western part of the Atlantic coast. You know, so Olokun, and then Night Rain. I mean, we memorized this for secondary school. See how piquant, how telling it is about conditions.
Prof, I think the audio could be better.
Yes, how his poems, like Night Rain, connect us to the environment and the socioeconomic conditions of the people who inhabit the aquatic area of the Niger Delta. And I said, night rain taught us so many things. When we first studied it as a secondary school subject, taught us about the technology of constructing the house of raft, of raffia palm, and then the very part that some of the places will be open, you will see the sky from it, and during the daytime they're all right, but when the rain comes, it goes through those holes, and the floors are flooded, and the children will be scampering to the dry part of the, it's such a telling story that it made us to understand that, yes, we were listening to our own poet, that's J.P. Clark. So streamside has changed. Streamside has changed. Yes, your mother goes to market, and many markets along the creeks of the Niger, and you are waiting for your mother to come back. He has not come back. The child is worried. That is the experience conveyed in that poem, Streamside Has Changed. I'm saying that the titles of the poems and the subjects that they dealt with are so well connected that the entire culture and the worldview of the people are conveyed both in the images as well as in idiom used in the poem. This, of course,
connectivity challenge is from Professor Dara's end. It's the reality of our environment. It's a technology we are trying to get used to. Professor Gigi has struggled to get on this program. Oh dear. So sorry. So sorry. We've lost him. We've lost him. You will recall that, oh dear. You will recall that at the beginning, the video, the evaluation tape wasn't clear. It wasn't audible. So at the end of this program, we're going to play it. It's very short. So be kind enough to remain in the audience and listen. Thank you, Professor Dara. I think that's all we can take for now. We're racing against time. Are there questions, please? If you have a question, just indicate electronically or type it on the chat box. Professor Godwin Sogolo, yes, sir. Yes, you are recognized. We recognize you, Professor Sogolo. Professor Sogolo is recognized to ask his question or make a comment. Yes. No, you are not, you are still muted, Prof. Sir, you are still muted, unmute. Unmute, sir. We still can't hear you. There is no sound from your end. Unmute.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think I've,
yes,
okay,
yes.
Thank you very much. I want to first congratulate the organizers of this program. I'm lucky to have been a participant and to have had this opportunity of seeing great men in the literary world. From all the contributions, I must say that the picture the portrait of our great literary giant is that of a literary writer. Is a creative writer, a poet, a novelist, a cultural writer, a feminist, a social critic, a minority fighter, and so forth. So each of the contributors are taking him from their own perspective. And the question I want to ask, and I think any of the contributors can really answer this question. If you were to describe J.P. Clark just in one language, who is he? In a much more universal terms than what you have done, because you have said is this, is that, is that, and so forth. Personally, what I've seen in him, you said talking about a humanist. That this man, you find that almost in every contribution that is made, that this man is a humanist to the core. I don't know whether one of you will, has a better description of J.P. Clark. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sogolo. When it comes to answers time, we will call on one of the panelists to answer the question. Any other hand raised electronically? Earlier on, Professor Falola had said we all look well in the literary world, that economic hardship has not affected us. There is something as smiling and suffering, or suffering and smiling. So I think that's the case. The hardship in Nigeria is real. Yes, any other question? If no question at this time, may I invite one of the panelists to respond to that question. How do we describe in one sentence Professor J.P. Clark, writer, poet, dramatist, essayist, and humanist? Yes, is anyone of the discussants who is going to answer that?
I can do that.
Ibadan, please be on standby. Dr. Mosiro, please be on standby. We will play the Shoyinka tape shortly. Yes.
Oh, okay. I can't
respond. Yes, please do.
Okay. Yeah. The question Professor Sogolo asked about his being a humanist, describing with one word. I think if you look at humanists across the world, everybody, you use what is in your society, your own environment, your own neighborhood, to express what you express there that is so real that is applicable to other people elsewhere, becomes the humanist. You cannot have universal ideas as such. Even whether Shakespeare wrote about England, J.P. Clark wrote about using his Yoruba background to do his work, what he writes there about humanity, about the person, makes him a universal man, universal artist. So it's not, the setting has to be in one society or local. The interaction between humans among themselves, the way they relate to the environment, but he's been able to show, even through something like Song of a Goat, that it's a humanist, he understands human nature. So you understand human nature through your own immediate society. And the thoroughness or the depth of that understanding makes you the humanist whose feelings or ideas become applicable across cultures. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Prof. Sir. Hello, Prof. Sir.
Yeah?
Yes.
There's a question, Mr. Monui or Dr. Monui is anxious that will the question on the chat box not be read. His question is, how can this platform help literary works and encourage Nigerian students? Another question, how can most
literary professors come together and help the literature world explode and help the culture of reading? So those are two questions from the chat box.
Thank you for drawing my attention to those questions. Professor Bilika, you want to take the first question, and then Professor Nduka Otieno the second question. If we do that in a minute, and then we take the Shoyinka tape, we'll have a vote of thanks and comments by Professor Ebonlua Clark, and then we'll come to the end of the program. Yes, the first two questions: how can literary professors help writers, encourage reading? Then the chat box, please. Yes.
Yes, I hope.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think the best thing we can do as professors of literature is perhaps to, first of all, expose writers, try to give critical attention to them, particularly the younger ones, the emergent ones, and even the older ones. There are various perspectives that we can give, to the write-ups. But then we need to be holding regular meetings, even if it is not a physical one, the kind of the thing that we are doing here. And we should be able to maybe, perhaps today we have taken JP Clark. Another time we can take some other person, maybe a younger person. We can take up Shoyinka, and like Professor Jaide has done. We can look at other areas that people have not really, attempted in doing on Shoyinka. So I think that is very important that we begin to think proactively by having regular meetings. It could even be Zoom, like we'll have this one, so that we can approach these perspectives. I mean, give prominence to our writers and encourage our students. They don't read. They don't read. Even in the university, some vice chancellors discourage students from buying books that are written by their teachers, and that is bad. If you don't buy books, how do you read? So for me, that's the way I will answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. The second question, and that will be all. We are racing against time, please. Yes, Dr. Nduka Otieno.
So I think that the first question is related to the second question in terms of promoting literature awareness and, as it puts it in here, reading culture. I would like to chime into what Professor Senbilika had said, in terms of the efforts. But it's important to recognize that professors of literature also have a lot of limitations. There's only so much they can do. Part of the ways that they have done so has been, been through the classes that they teach, and then initiatives like this, which Professor Hope Egaga and colleagues at UNILAG, have put together. So it's important to encourage the younger ones and students, to also take their destiny in their own hands to a very large extent, not to wait all the way for what the professors can do, but what they also can do, to help expand discourses on literature and explode, and have the culture of reading. So I would just like to keep it short. It's a communal effort with all of us playing the different roles that we can, as much as possible, to contribute in creating more awareness about literary texts and improving reading culture.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Bosro, please. I'm sorry we can't take more questions. The Shoyinka tape, please. We're sorry, we're trying to get the tape. Pastor Hephiza Egede, be on standby for vote of thanks. Closing remarks by Professor Ebu Clark. Once we finish screening the Shoinka tape.
Hello?
Yeah.
Did you call me, sir?
No, the Shoinka tape to be on now.
Hello?
Mute. Please mute. Yes, it's as if we are still having problems with the Shoinka tape. Can we then have the vote of thanks by one of the daughters of Professor J.P. Clark? Hello? It's not working. Yes, let's keep the tape. Skip the tape, please. Yes. No, keep it, yes. Yes, please. Can we have Pastor Hephiza Egede, daughter of Professor J.P. Clark, give the vote of thanks? And we'll take closing remarks by Professor Ebu Clark. Yes. Pastor Egede?
Maybe I should take the closing remarks first before the votes of thanks.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Can all hear me? Can all hear me? Who has asked you to start your video? Start my video. All right, good. You can see and hear me. I want to thank everybody for participating in this program. Really overwhelmed. But my daughter will do a better job than me on that. I cannot really add to what has been said. The presentations have been extremely insightful. I've learned a lot myself. Professor Jade, I would like to say that I think he started participating in world literature when he was elected to be one of London underground poets. London Underground has this program of carrying poems from different nations in the tube stations, in the station itself and inside the tube as well. So he was a London Underground poet in 2002, as far back as that, when his poem Ibadan went round the whole of London Underground system with other poets like Chaucer, Yeats, and so forth. And every year they'll bring out a book of the poems that they had used in the London Underground. Then it went out of tradition, and I hear it has now come back. So I think that he's had his full share, could have had more. And I think it could have been because he was a writer of the minority. And in those days, it was limited. It's different now. So if I'm going to make my own contribution, it will be more academic. And that is to just add a few things here and there from my own point of view. I listen and I watch with some great feeling of emotion, because when I started work, we had no professor this, no professor that in English and theater arts. Definitely not. They were all professors, colonial officers, or from Europe or from America. It took a while before we started having our own professors of English. So when I listen to you all, especially Professor Mabel, if I can't pronounce the last name, forgive me. It really, I was really so happy to hear you. And thank you for your contribution on feminism. I wonder though whether successful feminism can only be if you're not married, or did I get it wrong? I know you have a lot of activities of feminists now, the Me Too movement. Some are married, some are not married, but you get the impression that most are not married. But that's for today, it's for now. In his time, that could not be there, because if you were not married, you had problems in his own time. Remember that some of us were brought up in polygamy. He was brought up in polygamy, I was brought up in polygamy. The difference between his polygamy and mine were he was polygamy, still polygamy, whatever source it is. So it's very difficult for a person, for a writer to write about what he doesn't know. The knowledge of you could actually have non-married feminists was not, I think, within his consciousness, Professor. Now, for my own, the second point, I made the error of judgment of telling my husband when we met, well, the person who would be my husband when we met, that I was a professional verse speaker and I had gone through the apprenticeship of how to speak verse from the age of 9, taking my exams from the age of 10 until 21, which was the tradition in those days. You enter the top theater institutions and you cannot verse speak, you will not be admitted. It's as simple as that. And if you fail that subject, no matter how fantastic you are as an actor or actress, you will not qualify. So the attention to verse was very, very, very strong and rich. I returned to Nigeria to find that most of the poets, they had their poems published before performance. All right. So
the network challenge, is it from here?
Oh, okay.
Is it from
all right.
End?
Do we still have the network challenge, audio challenge? What challenge is it? Is it audio or video?
It's okay, ma. We can hear you, ma.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma.
Can I be heard now, or do
Yes,
I just say thank you very much and let the...
We can hear you.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Everybody. Okay. Now, where was I? So I made that error, and we shared the same block of flats. Within 1 hour, my to-be husband knocked on my door with a huge file of his poems and said, well, you said you can read poetry. Can you read these poems for me? And then, I'll listen to you reading them. When can you do so? I said, okay, give me about a week or two. And he went, and I pushed the file somewhere else. The following day, I went to Lagos, zoomed to Lagos, hoping that I'll be let off. I wasn't. So to cut a very long story short, I became his personal reader, unpaid reader, not paid at all. From a read in the Tide, I read his poems to him. to remains of the tide. And just looking at it now, I started with tide and I finished with tide, because not long after the remains came out, he died, you know. So I did have some measure of that performance input, because to me, poetry and theater, they belong to the performing art forms. I think it's difficult to really understand poetry properly until it has been performed, you know. And I think this is where we have that weakness. But contemporary poetry is not like that, because I still keep in touch. You do have groups that meet monthly, sometimes even weekly, to have poetry jams, they call it, reading their poems, and some of them may not be published at all. But in my husband's time, they were published before they were performed. And I think that we had some measure of that kind of problem. Now, what is happening is that the professional performance no longer exists. What has happened is that all the poets, universally so, globally so, have sacked all the professional speakers and taken over speaking their poetry themselves. And I think it's a great pity, because not all poets are good speakers. My husband certainly was not. I would actually beg him, don't speak, please. Don't read your poems. You know, he would immediately dismiss me and read his poems. And I think that when poets read their own poems, some of them mangle their words, they mangle their rhythms. And we don't get the depthness and richness of what they have written as the professional performer would give. I remember I'm now retired, I've been retired 30 years now, but I still keep in touch. And in the privacy of my sitting room, of my bedroom, I can open a poem and read it. And I say, let me try this one backwards and see how it reads. Like I did one Osundare's poem on corruption. See, I don't get that feeling, that taste of corruption. Let me try it another way. And I read that poem from the last stanza to the first. And it made sense to me, total sense, complete sense. Because as I jumped from one verse, one stanza to the next one, I saw a void, as if I was going to land into a void, into an abyss, which the poem did not give me, reading it the right way. So then after getting that void feeling, I then started reading it the right way, from the beginning to the end, in the privacy of my room. And I think it took me about 6 weeks of continuous working. I would go and come back. And reading it now the right way, I now was able to get that feeling of void in the performance of the. What does corruption give you? It is totally, what can I say? It kills, it's destructive completely. And the people who live within that environment are in void. They have no standing whatsoever. And I think that it is a professional who can help to bring such tone, such colors, such richness into poetry. And I think it's a great pity that the poets now have taken control of what they write. I can't write a word. I really can't. I wouldn't know how to start to write a fiction except Once Upon a Time. I can't write a play. But what I can do is to interpret and perform. And I believe one day, I hope that the poets, unless we have that rare combination of the writer and the performer, the writer and the poet, and they're very few. They come very few into this world. I think that we should go back to that professional performer of poetry, because poetry is a performing art before it is a written art. That is I'm saying this now because I'm not allowed to talk tomorrow when you're going to have lots of reading of my husband's poems. And I know I'm going to enjoy it. And so don't be afraid. It's going to be beautiful. But I'm just warning poets, like, please try, unless you're a very good speaker, keep your mouth shut. Try and get people who can read your poems well. Forget me, I just became an octogenarian last week. So I'm already in the departure. I'm already in the departure. Thank you very much. I'm already in the departure lounge. I get the younger ones who have trained in it. And it's a pity that most of the theater institutions, I think in Nigeria, I don't think they really have any sessions on the spoken word. Professor Mabel, do you?
Not really, ma'am.
Yeah, there you
not
are.
Really, ma'am. But we do have we do have lectures in voice and speech where students
lectures,
are taught how to articulate. Performances of plays are more common, except in the Association of Nigerian Authors, where you have poets perform their poetry. You actually refer to the jam.
I'm afraid we are running.
It's okay. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. But just one point, one final point. In my husband's time, the modernists, you remember they did have a lot of verse plays, more verse plays than you get now. So the actor had to be a very good verse speaker in my husband's time. All right. With Shakespeare and up to modern time.
Thank you, ma.
Right.
Thank you very much.
So much for being here. Thank you. I've really genuinely learned a lot. Let's journey back home to where we have some of you already at home. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We really wanted to hear you, and this is a very good way to conclude. But officially, there's someone who is assigned to thank all of us. May I now yield the mic to Hephiza Egede, daughter to JP Clark, to do the vote of thanks. Pastor Egede, are you there?
Okay.
Yes. No, unmute. You're still muted. Good, great.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us this evening to have this session on my father's first memorial. I just want to start off first by thanking the local organizing committee led by Dr. Mushuru, Professor Femi Oshofiso, and Professor Hope Egaga. Thank you so much for all the time you have spent in making sure that all of this goes very smoothly. We're really very appreciative. I want to also thank the University of Lagos and the University of Ibadan. Thank you for all that you have done to continue to advance and to preserve the literary and academic legacy of our father, and also of our father. On behalf of my mom and my siblings, we really are very grateful. I want to thank our big uncle, Professor Wole Soyinka, for graciously giving the open remarks, although we haven't had an opportunity to listen to it. But I'm sure that we'll have that opportunity to view and listen to Professor Soyinka's remarks. Thank you so much, sir, for your friendship with our father, and we really appreciate that. I also want to thank all the panel of speakers, the distinguished speakers, for the rich discourse on the works of our dad. It's really been very highly educative and insightful. And thank you for all your talks. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to sort of review and listen to your remarks. Thank you to everyone who is on the line today. It's been amazing seeing the number of distinguished members of the Nigerian academic community on the line. I want to thank also Emeritus Professor Ayo Banjo, Emeritus Professor Daniel Izevaye, Professor Ronke Akinshete. I also want to thank Professor Karina Aribisala there's quite a lot of lots and lots of distinguished members of the academic community here today. Unfortunately, obviously, we can't single everyone out because of our time. I also want to thank Dr. Alwyn Yafele, the head of Department of Management, Business and Law from the Cardiff Met University, who joined in. Thank you so much for joining in. So we'd just like to thank everyone who's been here today. This is the first day. Tomorrow is going to be much more interesting. Today has been amazing, but tomorrow we have celebrating the life of Professor J.P. Clark, organized by the Association of Nigerian Authors, and it will also feature a cancer talk. So please join in tomorrow. So a big thanks to everyone. And obviously I can't miss out without thanking my two uncles, the patriarchs of our family, the Clark Beckerderham family. So I would like to thank Chief E.K. Clark, Edwin Clark, and also Ambassador Blessing Clark for all your support, your fatherly love throughout this year. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you for thanking us. I also want to thank you for thanking us, really. And that's how it is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Nigerian time. There will be another program that will run for 2 hours, and on Wednesday, there'll be a live production of The Wives Revolt. Please join us in continuation of the literary feast. Thank you very much, and bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Professor Dara, nice to see you. Sorry we couldn't hear you through. Can you hear me? But I can't hear you. Wonderful to see you. We'll get you back, I'm sure. Architect Majoro, thank you so much. I'm leaving now. Thanks, everybody.
I hope there will be improvement in virtual activity that it will be live. It will go to earth. Oh.